What gives me hope these days is seeing how many people there are around the world trying to make a difference in so many different spheres of life. All of them thinking that they're alone, most of them working with very limited resources, and working toward the same goal, which is a peaceful world, and a world where people are happy and creative and feel connected. One of the things that gives me hope is finding out that there are still thriving cultures around the world, little pockets of societies where people don't feel alone, they don't feel isolated, they don't feel lonely, they feel a part of a whole, and that they belong. That gives me a lot of hope. Also, going out in nature gives me hope. When I get too caught up with what's going on around the world right now that's problematic, hunger and war and terrorism and the degradation of the environment, going out in nature, bringing a little plastic bag to pick up the debris that human beings have left, the beer cans and so on, and looking at the flowers, looking at the trees, seeing the cycles of the seasons, and watching the clouds. I find that helps ground me in the realization that all really is well, that things look bad because the pus is rising to the surface, because the healing process is doing what it needs to do. And there's a lot of ugliness out there as we heal. It's very easy to get hopeless. And I think the most important thing for people who are activists, for people who want to make a difference in the world, is to keep from getting bitter. That's probably the most important challenge that people have to face, is their loss of hope and a feeling of bitterness about the world. And I do that by not spending all my time working in this area of birth and breastfeeding and bonding and ending circumcision and questioning vaccination, because I need to fill my cup so that I can give out without a sense of bitterness. And I do that reading poetry, I do that taking walks, I do that petting my kitty and looking at the chickens and watching films, reading books that have absolutely nothing to do with my field. And I know not everybody's like that. I know a lot of people are able to singularly focus and dedicate their entire lives to something. I find that possibly because I still carry enough trauma in me, that it's very important for me to do the things that bring me a sense of sweet joy, and to do a lot of it. I think the biggest challenge that we face is fear. And I know that sounds like such a small thing. Oh well, just get over it. But it's at a core level of fear that has caused us to be disconnected from our body. And virtually everything we see in the media perpetuates that. Virtually everything we hear from people around us perpetuates this sense that if a catastrophe is not happening now, it's about to. It's a very fear-driven world right now, not a joy-driven world. And we are so good at being acculturated, at being socialized to what the messages are that are out there, and we're bombarded with them constantly. To give people a sense of the importance of turning off the television and not reading the news, or if you're going to open a newspaper, then bless it and pray over it before you open it, I know I just tend to read the bad news. And I think that's one of the most challenging things that we face, is this constant hyperstimulation in the culture. I went to see a movie the other day, and there were 12 previews, and every one of them was fear and violence. It was all, you know. I almost walked out before the movie started. And I looked around me to see how other people were reacting, and I think people have numbed themselves to the level of hyperstimulation there is, because they can't function otherwise. This is how people function doing things in hospitals that aren't kind and don't work. You have to turn yourself off. If you're going to do circumcisions, if you're going to do intensive care nursery work where you're separating the baby from the mother and you're poking and prodding this baby and doing blood drawings, all kinds of things, eventually you've got to numb yourself in order to continue to do it. And what I see happening in the culture is the whole culture is numbing itself to how much sadness there is and how much fear there is about what's going on in the world and whether we as a species will make it. The good news is that the good things are getting better, and people who, there's a level of consciousness that I didn't see in the 70s that I see now that is much more sophisticated, much more grounded, well-grounded, in so many different ways. In the 60s and 70s, we just had a dream. We had a vision that the world could be better. We had no idea what was coming down the pike, heading toward us, that we would have to deal with. And we weren't prepared for it. And we were very naive. It's not that the vision and the dream was wrong, it was right. There can be a peaceful world. It is possible for people who are very different and see the world differently to coexist, to respect each other, to honor each other's ways, and to live together and cooperate. But it requires a level of trust that I think most people have lost. And what I see all around me is people reacting to this core disconnect in their bodies, this feeling of betrayal, which I feel goes back to the very beginning of life. Were our needs met? Okay, one of the things that gives me hope is the very clear knowing that there are seasons in the world of change, seasons where things are more contracted, seasons where there's an opening, and that these things are really beyond the human. They're the transpersonal, they're the planetary, and we're entering one right now, I believe, even as things feel like they are contracting more and more people are getting frightened and more reactionary. There is an opening that is happening, that is possible. There is an opening that's happening that makes things possible that wouldn't have been possible a year ago. It has to do with the right time. And I also have to ask, why me? Why others like me who grew up with lots of dysfunction and trauma around us and in our lives? What is it that has kept us going despite the feelings that we have and the hypersensitivity we have to what is not working? And that's a good thing. That means there's an unknowable and unquantifiable something, an urge that many people are feeling around the world. Yes, we're a minority, but it doesn't take a majority. It takes a small, dedicated minority to move the ship. And I take great hope in that. A lot of times what I do is I'll go to a conference like the Bioneers Conference to see what's happening in the environmental movement. What's happening, and how does that relate to peace and social justice? And how does that relate to education and criminal justice system? And I just keep coming back to the key has to do with how we hardwire the human brain. I hate that word, but how we really create the structure of the human brain and nervous system, the circuitry, the things that make people tick, and what do we need to do in order for development to flourish, human development to flourish. And it's so simple. It doesn't cost money. It has to do with touch. It has to do with soft voice. It has to do with being responded to. It's dead on simple. We really aren't pushing a river here. It allows me to go, oh, this isn't as big as I thought it was, you know? It's just a linchpin is what happens at the beginning of life. As that organism, that human being is coming into existence, conception to age 1 and the preparation of the mother's body and the father's psyche and his body for this conception. If there's joy and there's love, and people can slow their pace enough that they can experience the gaze of a child and the joy of being with another person and a body up against theirs and the feeling of a hug, then there's so much that we can do from there in terms of healing trauma. So I'm excited to be part of a movement that's looking at what I feel is the cornerstone, the piece that's been missing from all of these movements: peace, social justice, health, spirituality, all of the different issues around the environment and the toxicity in the world have to do with what kind of human beings are we raising. And if we meet people's needs at the beginning of life, then they will respond to what the problems of the world are in a simple, straightforward way, and move everything else out of the way, whether it's hyperstimulating media, fear-based news, whatever it is. They'll be moving toward sanity and health. And I hope I live long enough to see that shift. Yeah. I think the challenge for many of us is being able to bear witness to what the suffering of the world is without getting sucked down into it. Just like when there are eclipses of the sun and you're not supposed to look directly into the sun or you could get blinded, I think it's the same thing with tragedy and pain. It's not to look away from it. It's to look at it with just slightly shift your attention so you're not staring at the problem and yet not ignoring it either. And that takes courage. That takes a level of consciousness and sophistication that it requires practice. And I like to hang out with people who do that. Well, I have a grandson who's a teenager right now, 15 and a half, and I'm watching what he's doing and feeling and how his friends are thinking and behaving and what their lives are like. And what I try to slip into the conversation when I'm driving him to school or one of the others to school, whenever I can, is you don't have to do what everybody else does. You really can follow your heart's yearning. And the important thing is to try enough things that you can get a sense of what really gives you joy. You can lead a life that's different from other people, and it's okay. It's okay.